Welcome to the House of Secrets, not the House of Mystery, that's a different house. Swamp Thing time. Greetings comic lovers and welcome back to Casually Comics, the channel where we chat all things comics, from reviews of comics new and old to history to anecdotes, really wherever our whims take us. Swamp Thing is a unique character in a couple of ways. One of them is in terms of being one of the few characters to have some pretty significant lore changes masterfully interwoven into the story, in a way that enriched the history rather than diminishing it. The journey of the Swamp Thing has taken many turns, and yet somehow for the most part, they all managed to fit together, unless you're Alec Holland's brother. R.I.P. Alec Holland's brother, written out of existence by editorial. Many know the first Swamp Thing as Alec Holland, or the mass sentient plant being that believed itself to be Alec Holland, or the representative of the Parliament of Trees. But at the start, the Swamp Thing was none of these things. The Swamp Thing was initially going to be a one-off horror short, this in the House of Secrets, issue 92, from the year 1971. Swamp Thing was created by Wein and Bernie Wrightson. For Wein, it was during a time when he would write any and everything, during the trying to make a name for yourself period. He described the process of coming up with a concept thusly: Swamp Thing was a lucky accident. It was a character born out of desperation. The character got named accidentally. I kept referring to that Swamp Thing I'm working on. The thing meant the story, not the character, but the name stuck. The Swamp Thing tale would end up doing quite well. Wein would later state, when discussing going from this one short story to an ongoing, it was a very personal story. To everyone's astonishment, myself the least among them, it was the best-selling story DC published that month. This initial tale we're about to examine would not continue on in the traditional sense. When the solo Swamp Thing series was launched, this original story would be re-examined and re-edited, with certain elements surviving and others being expanded upon or disregarded. The first Swamp Thing was a gothic horror romance, which was a tale that was very fitting for the book it found itself in. House of Secrets is an anthology series that had several stops and starts at DC Comics. This story comes from the era of the revival, following the initial 80-issue run, which lasted from 1956 to 1966. The series would resume in 1969 and pick up from where the numbering had left off, so at issue 81. As a horror suspense series operating during the time where the reign of the CCA, the Comics Code Authority, was still decently strong, though heading towards waning in the horror arena, lines had to be delicately maneuvered around. Less so for this series, as the code would find itself modified in 1971. This series would not only benefit from some of these changes, but ultimately be part of why parts of the code were re-examined and also changing the industry as a whole. Issue 83 in 1970 saw the introduction of printed writer credits within the issues themselves as a result of a story being rejected because the horror host, Abel, mentioned the story had been told to him by Wandering Wolfman. This was a reference to the author, Marv Wolfman. Code authorities, however, thought that they meant an actual werewolf inside the story, and that was a no-no. So they would only allow it to go forward if it was made explicitly clear that Wolfman was the name of the author. No lycanthropes present. And of course, you can't just credit one writer once and then keep going forward and not expect some kind of complaint. And so going forward, writer's credits. Thank you, House of Secrets. Swamp Thing itself as a comic series, when it began its second run in the 80s, would eventually abandon attempting to seek the CCA's approval at all. So after a time, it was not Comics Code approved. This first story was, though. So let's take a look at the first appearance of the Swamp Thing. This cover is a classic horror cover that would itself later be homaged in the 80s Swamp Thing series with issue 33 in 1985. The woman there would be Abigail. Here the woman featured is the protagonist's wife, Linda, who is modeled off of comic book author Louise Simonson. This is a confirmed fact. Wein stated, I have so many quotes today. Today's a good day. That's Louise Simonson. Many of the characters in that particular short story are modeled on real people. The villain is Mike Kaluta. Bernie himself, I think, is sort of Alex Olson. All of the people in it was one of those sorts of things where Bernie was trying something and basically had many of the shots posed and took photos and worked from that. There is no escape from the House of Secrets.
I cannot remember the morning anymore, but I know the evening well. I belong to it now, and it cares for me in return.
So right off the bat, you can tell this is a very romantic type of storytelling, but it's also very melancholic. Melancholic, I suppose, would be a better terminology. The Swamp Thing rises from a bog, moving towards a destination that it moves towards every night, heading towards a mansion.
A stately sanctuary, full of bright lights and promises, and memories that bring only pain.
Very proud of myself for resisting the stately Wayne Manor joke. Now is not the time, for this atmosphere is full of gloom, just like stately Wayne.
I have stood watching that old great edifice for more nights than I want to recall.
This story is going to have three perspectives, and it's going to swap between them very well. It's not going to be confusing as to who you're dealing with. It's also going to utilize different narrative perspectives to do so. Specifically, it's going to switch between first and second. For instance, the wife in the story, Linda, is for the most part experienced through second-person narration, but the villain and Swamp Thing are in first, but with very different tones, so you can easily distinguish them. All the perspectives are close, this so that you're drawn in. There's not that kind of omniscient disconnect that can sometimes occur but doesn't always with third person. You can be very drawn in by third person, which is arguably the most popular tense. Second person utilizes the verbiage of you, and it can be very difficult to accomplish without becoming cloying or abrasive, and some simply never find it enjoyable. But when done well, it can masterfully draw one into a story and serve not just as a means to insert oneself into the story, which is what tends to be done in, say, more of a fanfiction setting with reader X you fix, but it can also be used to define another character and allow you to form a more complete picture of them, but from a position that allows you to still be observing them. The novel You does this very well too, while also allowing space for the protagonist to be wrong. Here, the presence of Linda seems not to come from a specific person, but from the universe itself. You smile because he expects you to. But in the shadowed corridors of your heart, there is no real joy there. There can never be. Your name is Linda Olson Ridge, and your mind is a raging river. Linda is celebrating her 6-month anniversary to her new husband, Damien. So no red flags there. Knowing someone named Damien in a fictional story, perfectly safe. She's thinking about her first husband, Alex. That's right, Alex, not Alec. The first Swamp Thing was not Alec Holland, neither chronologically nor later thanks to retcon narratively. Alex is gone, darling. There is nothing to do but forget him. Never. For to forget Alex Olson is to deny a part of yourself. Oof, Damien, she hyphenated to keep his name. It's already over. Alex and Linda were married for a year. Damien was Alex's best friend. But you know, because this was a gothic horror story, that means he wasn't. He's a lying snake man. I really envy you, Alex. You got yourself quite a prize in Linda. She's standing right there, guys. She is not a prize to be won. An anniversary gift, darling. A symbol of my feeling for you. Oh, just one feeling. I see how it is, Linda.
A golden bracelet, Linda? I'll never take it off as long as I live.
Okay, watch the bracelet, which the digital recoloring unfortunately renders the same color as his flesh. Alex was a rising scientist doing something, sciencing all the science. It doesn't matter because his lab explodes and he dies. Or does he? What is a memory? It is a fleeting fantasy, far too painful to long remain, that carries you back through the portal of the past to the harsh reality of now. Linda is chilled and her husband notices, and here there is a really good swap between the perspectives and the tenses. Let's experience it together. You look into your husband's eyes and see only shadows, dark, veiled things that whisper to the surface and quickly fade away. And you wonder, what is going through his mind? While Linda doesn't get the answer, we do in the form of a thought balloon that then transitions into his own perspective of the past. So we get his recollections. I never really forgave Alex for marrying you when he knew how much I loved you. To see you every day so close, yet so impossibly distant. Never to know your touch or the fragrance of your hair. You want to smell her hair? Bruh. So as you can imagine, it was Damien who set up the laboratory explosion sabotage. He situated himself as a shoulder to cry on, a supportive figure, emotionally manipulating her, using that closeness that was already there because he was her husband's best friend. Our marriage was inevitable. That line is terrifying. Damien, however, has begun to notice that Linda is pulling away. She's distant. She can't really seem to stand his touch anymore. So he feels that she started to piece everything together. It's all over. Panic. This actually doesn't really seem to be the case. She just seems to be missing Alex. And Damien, the man who happened to kill her husband, is a poor substitute. However much I care for Linda, my own neck comes first. Linda must die. I think Damien just likes killing people. The Swamp Thing has been observing Linda at the house. He goes there every night. Through Damien's narration, we learn that Alex didn't die in the explosion, and so Damien had dragged his corpse to the swamp. We're left to infer that he somehow became the Swamp Thing. He was transformed through the power of dramatic sadness. Distraught and addled by his change, Alex only watches until on this night he is driven to act.
I watch Damien Ridge walk softly across the rug, and something glitters in his hand, a hypodermic needle.
He just had that, ready to go. The Swamp Thing crashes through the window and kills Damien in front of Linda.
Slowly, certainly, I force the life from Damien's black-hearted body, a life he does not deserve. For several minutes, Damien Ridge struggles for his unworthy life, tearing, clawing, ripping decaying shreds from what had once been my flesh, until at last he lies still, forever.
Linda is quite obviously horrified. She probably didn't even know that Damien was about to kill her. So now she's there with this creature, this Swamp Thing, who's just killed her husband. And the Swamp Thing finds that it's been so long that he can no longer speak.
The tortured, shattered look in her once sparkling eyes is more than I can endure. I turn my face away from her, and I start to go home. Only the swamp is kind to me now. and it's only the swamp that cares. I look down at my wrist at a barren place where once there was a golden bracelet, and I wonder where it is. If tears could come, they would.
The end! What a pick-me-up. You ready to face the day? This story is hauntingly beautiful. It's not revolutionary for the gothic horror genre, but it was very well told, and there are some little subtle tweaks that keep it interesting, aside from him being a swamp thing. It also firmly plants itself in the realm of the tragic, and less so in the realm of sensational or scandalous or shocking, which it could have gone. This is by withholding many key pieces of information from the characters that we, the reader, are privy to. There's also a nice bit of well-crafted subversion of expectations, but one that is still foreshadowed in the story, so you can work your way backwards and see how it still makes sense for the overall flow of the outcome, but is not necessarily the more obvious choice. This is surrounding the bracelet, an item you know will be important once it is highlighted. The more obvious assumption would be that the bracelet would still be on him, and at some point Linda would spot it and have to live with the horror that this swamp thing was her beloved husband Alex, who she has now just seen murder her current husband, who she would now also know she has married even though her former husband was still alive. Drama. And then some other things could probably be inferred if you work your way backwards, for Linda at least. Instead, the story makes use of it by its absence. The loss of the bracelet mirroring both the loss of his life and their love, simultaneously playing into a statement of how he would wear it for as long as he lived, for he no longer truly lives. It's a very mournful story with a sadness that permeates. That's more the tone than fear. It's horror not in the sense that it's shocking, but more so in the sense that it's dreadful. There are questions you are left with, but they feel inconsequential because the story is more about setting a mood, which it does quite well, but there are still some who may wonder some things. Was Linda on the path to realizing that Damien killed Alex? Did Damien make the connection that Alex was the swamp thing? What would become of Alex, this sad being loved only by the swamp? Those questions were ultimately just left behind, for when the swamp thing became a series, Len Wein decided he didn't want to continue on with this specific story. So instead it was reworked into something different, and the genre was also slightly tweaked. This story was used as the foundation for some of the key ideas. It does ultimately work, for while there are questions you could build upon in this story to expand it outwards, it ultimately does feel like a very self-contained experience. As Len Wein himself stated, this story is very personal and has an intimacy to it that lends itself well to being a slightly open one-shot. Whereas when Swamp Thing returns as Alec Holland, hired by the government to make a biogenic restorative formula, it matches the sci-fi genre a bit more, so it's more of a sci-fi horror action adventure, and it opens itself up for more varied stories that also lend themselves a bit better to an ongoing format. Now, this will not be for everyone. For some it will be territory that is too well tread, or perhaps too cliched. Wow, his best friend killed him for his girl? Some may rankle at Linda's seeming lack of agency, or some may not enjoy the futile feeling of it all. It's not a happy tale. Some may simply not find it necessary to understanding the history of the Swamp Thing. See, I'm adding the. I've been reading so much DC lately. Determiners just on the brain. This story would ultimately be tied back into Swamp Thing canon by Alan Moore, and there are some vestiges within this story, aside from informing the story of Alec Holland on the editorial level, that also serve as inspiration for some of what would become a key part of Swamp Thing, specifically the lore of the Parliament of the Trees. That whole section where it talks about how only the swamp cares, it makes it feel like the swamp is sentient, a living being, which ultimately would be an idea that they would work with. For those who are drawn in by its atmosphere and its sorrowful tone, it can be a very compelling story. One that is haunting in its handling of some pretty common topics, such as betrayal and revenge, and love lost forever. But those are just my thoughts, and I want to hear yours. What did you think of this tale? Did it move you, or was it meh? Can you see its place in the overall history of Swamp Thing, or can you take it or leave it? Do you like the Swamp Thing? Tell me things down below. While you're down there, please do all the YouTube things. Like, share, comment, subscribe, and hit the bell notification so that you never miss a vid. Thanks so much for taking some time out of your day spent discussing comics with me. I always appreciate it, and I will see you again soon. Bye-bye.